And as we were doing that, I was thinking about this simple truth that as a Christian, in our lives, most of the time, it's not hard to know what the right thing to do is, right? I would say 99% of the time, it's not that difficult to know what the right thing to do is, okay? Jesus gave us pretty clear commands. He gave us, love God, love your neighbor as yourself, and then later, love one another just as I have loved you. And that covers most stuff, most of our interactions. Figuring out in the day-to-day minutia what the right thing to do, honestly, if we take that plus the stuff we learned in kindergarten, right? Don't throw rocks at kids, stuff like that. The problem is not most of the time. Now, again, there are situations where it can be hard. But 99% of the time, the problem is not that we don't know what the right thing to do is. The problem I have, is not that I don't know what the right thing to do is. The problem I have is that sometimes I don't want to do the right thing. Okay? I know Jesus said to love one another just as he's loved me. The problem is that's hard, right? And it's messy and it's costly. And sometimes I just don't want to do it. Now, I know you guys are all way more spiritual than that. Never had that struggle. No, I'm kidding. That's a universal thing, right? All of us have been in that boat. All of us at one time have known what the right thing to do was, and we just didn't want to do it. And so what happens is, faced with that decision, something begins to happen in our mind, okay? When we know what the right thing to do is, but we don't want to do it, something begins to happen in our mind. A process goes off. And this happens because the truth is that all of us want to think of ourselves as good people, right? I love to, do you ever have like first day of school was not too long ago. I love all the pictures, especially when they put what the kid wants to be when they grow up, right? Because you never know what children are going to say. I saw one this week that was, my favorite one was, do they still use like the big chart paper in classrooms ever? Is that still a thing? Okay, some of the teachers are nodding. So one of the teachers had the big chart paper and she'd written all the kids' name on it, and they're like, what do you want to do when you grow up? And the first two were like pretty normal stuff. It was like fireman, whatever. And then like the third kid said Batman. And so guess what every answer was after that? Batman. They're like, I was going to say chef, but if I can be Batman, I want to be Batman. So like every kid's answer was Batman, which I thought was hilarious. And you never know. One kid, they're like, what do you want to do when you become an adult? And he'd drawn a picture of himself wearing a hat. And he said, I want to buy a hat and wear it on my head. Like, that's an achievable goal. Like, you can probably make that one happen. We've all said all kinds of different things about what we want to do when we grow up. I don't know how many kids I saw who'd put, I want to be a dog when I grow up, or something silly. My favorite one, I think, was chef/ninja. I couldn't decide, gonna do both. Get a day job, night job. I don't know if you do them together. I'm not really sure. I would like to talk to that kid to see how that worked out. But for all the things that we say we want to be when we grow up, has anybody ever said, when I grow up, I want to be a terrible person? We want to think of ourselves as good people, right? Even terrible people want to think of themselves as good people. So what happens when we want to think of ourselves as good, but we don't want to do what's good? Is something in our mind starts to happen. We begin to make excuses, right? And they're usually not very good ones. We come up with reasons why we don't have to do what we know is right. And again, this is me, but I'm willing to bet it's also you. We come up with excuses, and like I said, they may not be good. When Abby was little, they were talking about excuses at school. I'm guessing because it came up. Somebody was probably making excuses or lying. And so they talked about excuses. And I remember she came home and they were like, our teacher said that we should come up with an example of an excuse. And she said, my excuse would be if I was ever late for school. Now, some background information. We had fish, pet fish. And when a pet fish dies, what do you do with it? Flush it down the toilet, right? We also have a 30-pound French bulldog. And so Abby said that if she was ever late for her school, her excuse would be that our dog died and we had to flush it. And that's why we were late. And I was like, to be fair, we would be late if we tried to do that, because that would not work. Not a good excuse, right? Sometimes the excuse that we create in our mind aren't much better, but we do it. When we are confronted with knowing the right thing to do and not wanting to do it, we begin to make excuses, and we believe them because we are desperate to justify ourselves, right? We want to convince ourselves that it's okay to not do what we know is right. We want to make ourselves sound justified and moral, even in doing what we know is not right or moral. Now, if you're still with me, okay? If you've never been tempted not to do a good thing when you knew to, okay? See, that's never happened to me. If you have never sought to justify bad behavior, okay? And if you have never found it hard to love someone, then you can check out for the next 20 minutes, okay? It's not for you. For the rest of us, the beautiful thing is that we aren't the first people to deal with this, right? And so in Luke, I want us to take a look at this man that comes and asks a question of Jesus, okay? Because he has the same problem, the same issue. He comes to Jesus in Luke chapter 10. Luke chapter 10, verse 25. It says, and behold, a lawyer. This guy is a lawyer, and it's not a lawyer like what we know of today. This is a religious lawyer. So it's, all the things you might dislike about lawyers combined with all the things you might dislike about pastors. Like, probably not everybody's favorite person. But this guy is a religious lawyer, an expert in the law. And it says, behold, a lawyer stood up to put him, Jesus, to the test, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? Good question, right? What do I need to do in order to inherit eternal life? Now, it sounds like a good question, but it's wrong. You don't inherit eternal life based on what you do. That's not how inheritance works. You inherit based off of your relationship with the one who's passed, like that you're receiving the inheritance from, right? But this guy, he goes and he says, what do I have to do to inherit eternal life? And he, Jesus, said to him, what is written in the law? How do you read it? He's going, it's not that hard to figure out. What's it say? And the man says, and he answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, Jesus said to him, you have answered correctly. Do this and you will live. It's the right answer, right? Now, there isn't a distinction here in the grammar. I know some of you are really excited. Grammar lesson, like everybody loves those, right? But there is one distinction I want to point out. So just for a second. The guy uses a verb tense. Basically what he's saying is, what do I need to do, and having done it, receive eternal life? Like one thing. But Jesus responds and says, you have answered correctly. And he basically says, keep doing this and you will live. And so Jesus says it's not something you can just do once and you're done. But the life that we're called to live is about something that we continue to do, keep doing.